I thought taking care of family meant they'd take care of you when it mattered most. That cold Tuesday morning in November, my son Garrett Hill promised he'd pick me up from Millfield Station after my doctor's appointment in the city. "Just wait. By the main entrance, Mom. I'll be there by 3 p.m. sharp," he said. But 3 p.m. came and went, then 4 p.m., then 5 p.m. As the station emptied and darkness fell, I realized the truth. He'd simply forgotten about me. Again. But this time was different. This time, I had something he desperately needed: access to the family trust fund that his new business venture depended on. What Garrett didn't know was that abandoning your 68-year-old mother at a train station in November weather would cost him everything he'd been counting on. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting even, $1 at a time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 30 years, I'd been the reliable one. Clara Henderson, the mother who never said no, never complained, never caused problems. When Garrett's father passed 5 years ago, I became his go-to solution for everything. Need someone to watch the house while you're on vacation? Call Mom. Need a loan for the down payment? Call Mom. Need someone to drive 3 hours to help move furniture? Clara will do it. I lived in my small cottage in Brookhaven, about an hour from Garrett's life in the bustling city of Northview. He'd call every few weeks, usually when he needed something. "Mom, you're so good at handling these things," he'd say, and I'd feel useful, needed, important. The cottage had been my sanctuary since Harold passed. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a garden that bloomed faithfully every spring. I'd raised Garrett there, watched him graduate valedictorian, cheered when he got his MBA, and supported his every dream with both emotional encouragement and, when necessary, financial backing. The trust fund Harold had set up before his death was substantial, enough to ensure I'd never want for anything, and enough to help Garrett build the life he'd always talked about. That November, I'd scheduled a follow-up appointment with a specialist in Northview. The trains from Brookhaven ran twice daily, 7 a.m. and 4 p.m., and I'd taken the early morning one for my 1 p.m. appointment at Northview General Hospital. The procedure went well, just routine blood work and a consultation about my arthritis medication. Dr. Winters, a kind woman about Garrett's age, had assured me everything looked normal for someone my age. "Your bones are holding up remarkably well, Mrs. Henderson," she'd said, reviewing my x-rays. "Keep taking your calcium supplements and those gentle yoga classes you mentioned. You're doing everything right." I called Garrett as planned, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The worry about my health had been nagging at me for months, and getting the all clear felt like a gift. "All done," I told him when he picked up. "The doctor says everything looks good. Blood pressure's stable, bones are strong." She even complimented me on staying active. "Great, Mom. That's really great news." His voice carried that distracted quality I'd grown accustomed to, the sound of someone multitasking, probably scrolling through emails or reviewing documents. "So you'll be ready by 3 p.m.? "Yes, I'll wait by the main entrance like we discussed. The big glass doors with the bronze statue out front. You can't miss it." "Perfect. I'll see you then. Love you." The line went dead before I could return the sentiment, but I wasn't surprised. Garrett had always been efficient with phone calls, even as a boy. His father used to joke that Garrett could conduct business from his crib if we'd let him. I had 2 hours to kill before pickup time, so I decided to treat myself to lunch at the small cafe across from the hospital. Millfield Station was only a 10-minute walk from there, and I'd grown fond of their chicken salad sandwiches during my previous visits to the city. The cafe, called Rosemary's Kitchen, was warm and inviting, with checkered tablecloths and the kind of coffee that reminded me of Harold's Sunday morning brewing ritual. I ordered the sandwich and a cup of their autumn blend coffee, settling into a corner booth where I could watch the afternoon foot traffic through the large windows. Northview was so different from Brookhaven. All hurried people in dark coats, briefcases clutched tight, everyone moving with the kind of purpose that seemed to skip conversation entirely. In Brookhaven, I knew the grocery store clerk's daughter's name and the postal worker's favorite baseball team. Here, anonymity felt both liberating and lonely. At 2:30 p.m., I made my way to Millfield Station. The building was impressive, all marble and brass with high vaulted ceilings that made every footstep echo. The bronze statue Garrett had mentioned was impossible to miss. A larger-than-life figure of a railroad pioneer, his weathered face gazing toward the horizon with determined optimism. I found a bench nearby with a clear view of the parking area and settled in to wait. The November air had a bite to it, but I dressed warmly. My heavy wool coat, the scarf Garrett had given me last Christmas, and my most comfortable walking shoes. I pulled out the mystery novel I'd been reading and tried to focus on the plot, but my eyes kept drifting to the parking lot, scanning for Garrett's silver sedan. PM came and went. I checked my phone. No messages. Traffic in Northview could be unpredictable, especially on weekdays, so I wasn't immediately concerned. Garrett ran his own consulting firm now, and important client calls had a way of running long. I understood. I'd raised him to be dedicated to his work, just like his father. By 3:30, the station had grown quieter. The afternoon rush wouldn't start for another hour, and most of the travelers from the earlier trains had already been collected by their rides. I tried calling Garrett, but it went straight to voicemail. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. Just checking in about pickup time. Call me when you get this." At 4 p.m., I called again. Still voicemail. A small knot of worry began forming in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Garrett was responsible. He'd never just abandoned me. There had to be an explanation. The temperature was dropping as the sun began its descent behind the city skyline. I pulled my coat tighter and moved to a bench inside the station, where the heated air felt like a warm embrace. The marble floors were beautiful but cold, and I could feel the chill seeping through my shoes despite their thick soles. By 4:30, the knot in my stomach had grown into something sharper, more insistent. I tried calling again. This time, someone answered on the fourth ring. "Mom? Oh, Mom. Hi." Garrett's voice sounded distant, distracted. I could hear the clink of glasses and conversation in the background. Restaurant sounds. "Garrett, honey, I'm still waiting at the station. Are you on your way?" There was a pause. A long pause. Then I heard him say to someone else, "Give me just a second," followed by the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm actually in a meeting that ran really late. Can you grab a taxi? I'll reimburse you for it." The words hit me like cold water. "A taxi? Garrett, it's almost 5 p.m. You promised you'd pick me up." I know, and I feel terrible about it. But this client opportunity just came up last minute, and you know how important the business is right now. You're so resourceful, you'll figure it out. Resourceful. As if being stranded was a puzzle I should solve gracefully. "Garrett, I don't know the taxi company's here. I don't even know how much it would cost to get back to Brookhaven." "Mom, you have a smartphone. Just use the rideshare app I showed you. Or call the train station information desk. They'll help you figure it out. Look, I really have to get back to this meeting. We'll talk soon, okay?" The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, the device suddenly feeling foreign and heavy in my hands. Around me, the station continued its evening rhythm, announcements echoing through the speakers, travelers hurrying past with their rolling suitcases, the steady click of heels on marble. But I felt completely separate from it all, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. This wasn't the first time Garrett had prioritized business over family, but it was the first time I'd been left literally stranded because of it. As I sat there in the growing cold, something shifted inside me. A quiet voice I'd been ignoring for years finally spoke up clearly. "This isn't okay." None of this is okay. The next hour was a crash course in how little my son actually thought of me. I approached the information desk, where a tired-looking woman named Sophie Cook glanced up from her computer with practiced patience. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need help getting back to Brookhaven. My ride fell through." Sophie's expression softened immediately. "Oh, honey, you just missed the 4 p.m. train. The next one doesn't leave until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. She turned her monitor toward me. "There's the Grandview Hotel about 6 blocks from here, or I could help you call a taxi service." "How much would a taxi to Brookhaven cost?" She winced slightly. "About $180, maybe more with evening rates. It's almost an hour drive." $180. I had the money, of course, but the principle stung. Garrett made more in a day than I spent in a month, and he was asking me to pay nearly $200 to fix his broken promise. I thanked Sophie and walked back to my bench, pulling out my phone to navigate the rideshare app Garrett had mentioned. The technology that had seemed so simple when he'd shown me last Christmas now felt like a foreign language. After 20 minutes of frustrated tapping and error messages, I finally managed to request a ride. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The car that arrived was driven by a college-aged young man named Jay Lewis, who took one look at me and asked, "Ma'am, are you sure about this trip? It's going to be pretty expensive." "How expensive?" He showed me his phone. $194.50. That's with the evening surge pricing. I closed my eyes and authorized the payment. As we pulled away from Millfield Station, I called Garrett again. "Mom?" He sounded genuinely surprised to hear from me. "Did you get home okay?" "I'm in a rideshare car that's costing me almost $200 because you decided your meeting was more important than your word." Silence. Then, "Mom, I said I'd reimburse you." "That's not the point, Garrett. The point is that you left me stranded at a train station when I'd just come from a medical appointment. What if there had been an emergency? What if I'd gotten bad news from the doctor? But you didn't. You said everything was fine." The casual dismissal in his voice hit me like a slap. "So it only matters if I'm dying?" "Mom, you're being dramatic. You figured it out, just like I knew you would. You're the most capable person I know. Capable." There was that word again. The word that had become a cage I hadn't recognized I was living in. I was capable, so I didn't need consideration. I was resourceful, so I didn't deserve reliability. I was strong, so I could handle being treated as an afterthought. Garrett, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am 68 years old. I have arthritis in my hands and knees. I don't know this city, and I don't understand half the technology you expect me to use. Leaving me at that station wasn't trusting my capabilities, it was abandoning your responsibilities. Another pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to the same voice he'd used as a teenager when he'd been caught breaking curfew. "Look, I'm really sorry, okay? I'll Venmo you the money as soon as we hang up. And next time, I'll make sure I have backup transportation arranged." Next time, as if this behavior was inevitable, something to plan around rather than something to stop doing. "There won't be a next time, Garrett." "What do you mean?" The certainty in my voice surprised even me. "I mean, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not being your convenient solution to problems you don't want to handle yourself." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Mom, come on. You love helping out. It's what you do. It's who you are." And there it was. The truth he'd never said out loud but had been operating under for years. In his mind, I wasn't Clara Henderson, a woman with my own needs and limitations. I was Mom, the person whose purpose was to make his life easier. The rest of the car ride passed in silence. Jay, bless him, seemed to sense the tension and kept his music low and his conversation minimal. When we finally pulled into my driveway in Brookhaven, he helped me with my purse and even waited to make sure I got inside safely. "I hope tomorrow's a better day for you, ma'am," he said before driving away. Standing in my empty cottage, I felt the full weight of what had happened settling over me. This wasn't just about a missed pickup or an expensive taxi ride. This was about 30 years of teaching my son that my time, my comfort, and my dignity were negotiable. That his needs would always come before mine. That my role in his life was to solve problems, not to have them. I walked through the house, turning on lights in each room. Everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. The breakfast dishes in the sink, yesterday's newspaper folded on the coffee table, the Afghan Harold's mother had crocheted draped over the back of the sofa. The familiarity should have been comforting, but instead it felt suffocating. This house, this life, this version of myself. It all felt too small suddenly. My phone buzzed, a notification from my banking app. Venmo payment received from Garrett Hill, $200. Note, "Sorry again, Mom. Thanks for being so understanding. Love you." Understanding. He'd paid me back and assumed that made everything fine. That the money erased the humiliation, the cold weight, the casual dismissal of my feelings. The note felt like a pat on the head. "Good dog. Here's your treat. Now." Forget this ever happened, but I wasn't going to forget. For the first time in years, I was seeing the pattern clearly. Every favor I'd done, every emergency I'd solved, every time I'd said, "Of course, honey," when he'd called needing help, I'd been training him to see me as a resource rather than a person. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Harold had been meticulous about financial planning, and I'd inherited not just his money but his organized approach to managing it. The trust fund documents were filed neatly in a folder labeled Estate Planning, right where I'd left them after the lawyer's last visit. The Henderson Family Trust was worth $1.2 million, with me as the primary beneficiary and Garrett as the secondary. But more importantly, the trust included provisions for family business investments that could be distributed at my discretion. Garrett had been counting on those provisions for months now. 3 weeks ago, he'd called with excitement about a business opportunity, a chance to buy into a consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. "It's exactly what I've been working toward, Mom. But I need $300,000 for the partnership buy-in. The trust fund provision would cover it perfectly." At the time, I'd been proud. My son, following in his father's entrepreneurial footsteps, ready to take the next big step in his career. We'd scheduled a meeting with the family lawyer for next Friday to begin the paperwork. Now, staring at those documents, I realized something crucial. Garrett needed that money. His current consulting practice was successful but small. This partnership was his chance to move into the major leagues, to handle the kind of corporate accounts that would set him up for life. Without that $300,000, the opportunity would pass him by. For 30 years, I'd been the solution to his problems. Tomorrow, I was going to become a problem he'd have to solve. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt like I had power. Real power. Not the power to help and give and sacrifice, but the power to say no. The power to have expectations. The power to demand the respect I'd never thought to ask for. Outside, Brookhaven was settling into its quiet evening rhythm. Porch lights coming on, families gathering for dinner, the comfortable routines of a small town where people still kept their promises. Inside my cottage, Clara Henderson was planning to teach her son what it meant to leave someone stranded. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in bed replaying not just the day's events, but years of similar moments I'd somehow normalized. The more I thought about it, the clearer the pattern became. Like water slowly wearing away stone, Garrett had eroded my boundaries so gradually that I hadn't noticed until they were nearly gone. I remembered the first time it happened, about 6 months after Harold's funeral. Garrett had called on a Sunday evening, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you drive up to Northview tomorrow? I've got back-to-back client meetings and Allison's flying to Denver for her sister's wedding. Someone needs to be at the house for the appliance delivery." Allison Myers was his girlfriend then, a lovely marketing executive who traveled frequently for work. I'd liked her, though she'd always seemed slightly uncomfortable around me, as if she wasn't sure what role I was supposed to play in their relationship. "Of course, honey," I'd said without hesitation. "What time should I be there?" "Between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. I know it's a long window, but you know how these delivery companies are. 9 hours. He was asking me to sit in his house for 9 hours, waiting for a delivery he could have rescheduled. But I was still raw from grief then, grateful for any reason to feel needed. The drive to Northview took me an hour each way, and I spent $15 in gas, but he'd seemed so relieved when I called to confirm the washer and dryer had arrived safely. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." That phrase became his standard response. "I don't know what I'd do without you." It had felt like love then. Now I recognized it as conditioning. The pattern escalated over the months that followed. Could I house sit when they went to Miami for a long weekend? Could I take his car in for its inspection because his schedule was packed? Could I handle the cable technician appointment because Allison had an important presentation that day? Each request came with the same grateful tone, the same assurance that I was the only one he could trust with such important tasks. And I'd developed a Pavlovian response to his praise, agreeing before I'd even fully processed what he was asking. The financial requests started small. "Mom, I'm a little short on the security deposit for the new office space. Could you spot me $2,000? I'll pay you back with my next big contract." Of course, I said yes. Supporting your son's business dreams was what good mothers did, wasn't it? He did pay me back that time, 3 months later, with interest. It felt like proof that I could trust him, that my help was an investment in his success rather than a one-way transaction. I should have recognized it as the setup for bigger asks to come. The breaking point with Allison came almost exactly 2 years after Harold's death. Garrett had called on a Thursday evening, his voice carrying that familiar note of barely controlled panic. "Mom, Allison and I are having some relationship issues. She's staying at her sister's place for a few days, and I really need someone to talk to. Could you come up this weekend?" I'd driven to Northview that Friday afternoon, expecting to find my son heartbroken and needing comfort. Instead, I found him hosting a dinner party for potential business partners. 8 people seated around his dining room table, discussing investment opportunities over wine and the lasagna I'd brought, thinking it would be just the two of us. "Everyone, this is my mom, Clara," he'd announced as I stood in the doorway holding my overnight bag. "Mom, could you maybe help in the kitchen? You're so much better at this entertaining stuff than I am." I spent that entire evening serving food I hadn't prepared, refilling wine glasses and cleaning dishes while Garrett played the successful entrepreneur. When the guests finally left around midnight, he found me scrubbing the last of the pots. "That went really well," he said, loosening his tie. "Thanks for your help tonight. You're amazing at making people feel welcome." "Garrett," I'd said carefully, "you told me you needed someone to talk to about Allison." He'd looked genuinely confused. "Oh, that. Yeah, we worked things out. She's coming home tomorrow. But this dinner was so important, and I knew you'd make sure everything went smoothly." The manipulation was so casual, so complete, that I'd almost convinced myself I'd misunderstood the original conversation. Almost. Allison broke up with him 2 months later. When I asked what happened, he'd shrugged and said, "She thought I was too dependent on family. Can you believe that? Like having a close relationship with your mother is a bad thing." At the time, I'd felt defensive on his behalf. Now I wondered what Allison had seen that I'd been too close to notice. The requests kept coming, each one framed as an emergency only I could solve. His cleaning lady quit the day before an important client dinner. Could I drive up and clean? His house? His usual dog sitter canceled last minute. Could I watch Rex for the weekend? His accountant needed documents that were stored in his home office, but Garrett was stuck in a meeting across town. Could I drive over and scan them? The emergencies always seemed to happen at the most inconvenient times. On my birthday, when I'd planned a quiet celebration with my neighbor Eden Howard during my book club meetings, on the anniversary of Harold's death, when I'd wanted to spend the day at his gravesite. But Garrett's needs always took precedence because Garrett's needs were always urgent. Mine, apparently, could wait. The most humiliating incident happened last spring. Garrett had called during my annual physical exam, asking me to leave the doctor's office to handle a crisis at his house. The crisis turned out to be a missing spare key that prevented his housekeeper from getting inside. I'd driven an hour to Northview, used my emergency key to let the housekeeper in, and then driven home, missing my mammogram appointment that had been scheduled for months. "Thanks for saving the day, Mom," he'd texted later. "The house looks great. You're the best." When I'd tried to explain that I'd had to reschedule an important medical test, he'd said, "Well, it all worked out fine, didn't it? Your health is great, and my house got cleaned. Win-win. Win-win." As if my inconvenience was a victory we'd both achieved together. The financial requests had grown larger and more frequent too. The $2,000 for office space became $5,000 for new computer equipment. Then $8,000 for a business conference in California that would make all the difference for his client base. Then $12,000 for a down payment on the car he needed to project success to potential partners. Each time he presented detailed explanations of how the expense would benefit his business. Each time I convinced myself that supporting his success was an investment in our family's future. Each time, the repayment took longer and came with less gratitude. But it was the emotional manipulation that cut deepest. The way he'd preface difficult requests with comments about my loneliness. "I know you've been feeling isolated since Dad died, Mom. Maybe helping me with this project would give you something meaningful to focus on." The way he'd frame his emergencies as opportunities for me to feel needed. "You're literally the only person I can trust with something this important." He'd weaponized my grief, my love, and my desire to matter against me. And I'd handed him the ammunition every time I said yes without question. Every time I prioritized his convenience over my own needs. Every time I accepted his gratitude as payment for my dignity. Lying in my bed that November night, I realized that the train station incident wasn't an anomaly. It was the inevitable result of 5 years of teaching Garrett that my time, my comfort, and my respect were disposable. That his business meeting was more important than his promise. That his schedule mattered more than my safety. I'd created this monster by feeding it everything I had. But monsters, I was learning, got very hungry when you stopped feeding them, and I was about to put mine on a very strict diet. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather for November, as if the universe was mocking the cold reality I'd awakened to. I made my coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the last stubborn leaves cling to the oak tree Harold had planted when Garrett was 10. Even then, that boy had been impatient, asking every week when the tree would be big enough to climb. "Good. Things take time," Harold had told him, "and they're worth waiting for." Garrett had never learned that lesson. My phone rang at 9:17 a.m. I knew without looking that it would be him, calling with the casual expectation that yesterday's disaster was already forgotten. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice carried that practiced cheerfulness he used when he wanted something. "How are you feeling today? I was worried you might be tired after all that travel yesterday." "I'm fine, Garrett." "Good, good. Listen, I wanted to run something by you. I know we're meeting with the lawyer on Friday about the trust fund distribution, But I've been thinking, maybe we could move that up? The partnership opportunity has a deadline that's coming faster than I expected. Of course it did. In Garrett's world, everything was always urgent when it benefited him. What kind of deadline? Well, the firm needs the buy-in money by next Wednesday. I know it's short notice, but these deals move fast in the consulting world. Could we maybe meet with Mr. Patterson tomorrow instead? Reese Patterson had been Harold's lawyer and mine for over 15 years. A careful, methodical man who didn't appreciate being rushed. Reese doesn't work that way, Garrett. Legal documents take time to prepare properly. But you could call him, right? Explain the situation? He's always been flexible when it comes to family emergencies. Family emergencies. Yesterday, being stranded at a train station hadn't qualified as an emergency worth leaving a business meeting. 4. But today, Garrett's investment timeline was suddenly a family crisis requiring everyone else to scramble. This isn't an emergency, Garrett. It's poor planning on your part. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to the voice he used when he was trying to be patient with someone who wasn't grasping something obvious. Mom, I don't think you understand how big this opportunity is. This partnership could set me up for life. We're talking about a 10-fold increase in my annual income within 5 years. The $300,000 from the trust fund isn't just an investment in my business. It's an investment in our family's future. Our family's future. As if he'd been contributing to it for the past 5 years instead of steadily withdrawing from it. And what happens if the answer is no? Another pause. No to what? No to the money. No to rushing the lawyer. No to dropping everything to accommodate your timeline. I could practically hear him recalibrating, trying to figure out why I was asking questions instead of immediately solving his problem. Mom, you're not seriously considering saying no, are you? We've talked about this. You know how important this is to me. Yesterday was important to me. Sitting in that train station for 3 hours, watching the temperature drop, not knowing if something had happened to you, that was important to me. We already talked about that. I apologized, and I paid you back. I don't understand why you're still upset. And there it was. The fundamental disconnect that had defined our relationship for years. In Garrett's mind, an apology and financial reimbursement erased the emotional impact of his actions. Like I was a vendor he could pay off rather than a mother he'd hurt. Garrett, do you remember what you were doing when I called you from the station? I was in a business meeting, a really important one. Where was this meeting? At Meridian's downtown. Why does that matter? Meridian's, the upscale restaurant 3 blocks from Millfield Station. He'd been close enough to walk to me, but he'd chosen to stay comfortable in his leather booth, probably ordering expensive wine while I sat on a marble bench in the cold. You were 3 blocks away from me. Mom, that's not the point. It's exactly the point. The clarity in my voice surprised me. You could have excused yourself for 15 minutes. You could have picked me up and brought me to the restaurant. You could have invited me to join your important meeting. Instead, you chose to abandon me and then act like that was the reasonable choice. You're being dramatic. I had people depending on me. I was depending on you too. That's different. How? The question seemed to genuinely confuse him. Because you're my mom. You understand how business works. These clients don't. There it was. The brutal honesty I'd been afraid to hear. In Garrett's hierarchy of importance, I ranked below strangers because I could be counted on to understand, to accommodate, to accept whatever treatment he decided to give me. So being your mother means I deserve less consideration than your clients? It means you know me better than they do. You know I'd never intentionally hurt you. But he had hurt me. Intentionally or not, he'd hurt me repeatedly. And then he'd trained me to pretend it didn't matter, to be understanding, to focus on his intentions rather than the impact of his actions. Garrett, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. When was the last time you did something for me without me asking? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you prioritized my needs over your convenience? The silence stretched so long, I thought, he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller. Mom, you never ask for anything. You always seem so capable, so independent. I asked you to pick me up yesterday. That was asking for something. But that was just logistics. I mean, asking for real help, emotional support, the kind of thing I ask you for. And there was the revelation that broke my heart and freed me at the same time. Garrett genuinely didn't understand that I might need emotional support, that I might want someone to check on my well-being, that I might crave the kind of care I'd spent decades giving him. He'd constructed an image of me as endlessly strong, perpetually capable, emotionally self-sufficient. It was an image that served his needs perfectly because it justified taking without giving. If I didn't need anything, then he didn't have to offer anything. Garrett, I'm 68 years old. I live alone in a house that's too big for me, in a town where most of my friends have moved away or died. I have arthritis that makes it hard to open jars sometimes. I get lonely. I worry about my health. I miss your father every single day. Mom, I have needs. I have feelings. I have limits. And for 5 years, I've pretended otherwise, because it was easier than teaching you to see me as a whole person instead of just a resource. The words were coming out now like water through a broken dam. 30 years of swallowed complaints and suppressed hurt pouring out all at once. Spent 5 years being your emergency contact, your free labor, your bank account, and your emotional support system. And you've spent 5 years taking all of that for granted because I never complained. Because I always said yes. Because I was so afraid of being a burden that I became invisible instead. I appreciate everything you do. You know that. Appreciation isn't enough anymore, Garrett. I need respect. I need consideration. I need to matter to you when it's inconvenient. You do matter to me. Then prove it. How? Show up on Friday for our scheduled appointment with Reese. Don't ask me to change it. Don't pressure him to rush it. Accept that some things are more important than your convenience. And if I do that, you'll approve the trust fund distribution? The question revealed everything. Even now, even after everything I'd said, he was still thinking in terms of transactions. Do this thing to get that result. Give me what I want, and I'll give you what you want. Garrett, the money isn't a reward for good behavior. It's a business decision that I'll make based on what's best for the family. What's that supposed to mean? I stood up from my porch chair and walked to the railing, looking out at the oak tree Harold had planted. It was tall enough to climb now, strong enough to support weight, deep-rooted enough to weather storms. It had taken time to grow into what it was meant to be. It means I'm not your mother the resource anymore. I'm Clara Henderson, trustee of the Henderson Family Trust. And Clara Henderson makes decisions based on who can be trusted with family. Money. Mom, you're scaring me. Good. For the first time in 5 years, Garrett was experiencing uncertainty about my automatic compliance. For the first time, he was realizing that my support wasn't guaranteed. I'll see you Friday at 2 p.m. in Reese's office. Come prepared to discuss why you believe you've earned this investment. I hung up before he could respond. Standing on my porch in the unseasonable warmth, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. The quiet satisfaction of setting a boundary and knowing I had the strength to maintain it. The old Clara would have spent the rest of the day second-guessing herself, maybe even calling back to apologize for being difficult. But the new Clara, the one who'd been born in a cold train station yesterday, had work to do. I had 4 days to decide whether my son deserved $300,000 of his father's money. 4 days to determine if the man who'd left me stranded could be trusted with our family's future. By Wednesday morning, I'd made my decision. Not about the money, that would wait until Friday, but about something far more important. I was done being Clara Henderson, the accommodating mother who lived in the shadows of other people's priorities. It was time to remember who I'd been before grief and guilt had convinced me that my only value lay in being useful to others. I started with something small but symbolic. For 5 years, I'd kept my phone ringer on loud, always ready to drop, whatever I was doing when Garrett called. That morning, I switched it to silent and left it in the kitchen drawer while I took a long bath. The freedom of not being instantly available felt revolutionary. After my bath, I called my neighbor Eden Howard. Eden was 73, a retired librarian who'd moved to Brookhaven the same year Harold and I had. We'd been friendly for decades, but never truly close, partly because I'd always been too busy managing Garrett's crises to invest in my own relationships. "Clara?" Eden sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I was wondering if you'd like to have lunch today. There's something I want to discuss with you." We met at Pembridge Cafe, a little place downtown that served the kind of homemade soup that reminded you why small towns mattered. Eden arrived wearing a bright purple coat and carrying a well-worn leather purse that looked like it had stories to tell. "You look different," she said, studying my face across the table. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different." I stirred honey into my tea, choosing my words carefully. "Eden, can I ask you something personal? When your husband passed, did they start treating you differently?" Eden's expression grew knowing. She'd been widowed for 8 years, and her 2 daughters lived in California. "You mean, did they start talking to me like I was made of glass? Like I couldn't handle adult decisions anymore?" "Something like that." "Oh, honey." She reached across the table and patted my hand. "What's that son of yours done now?" The story poured out of me like confession: the train station, the pattern of demands, the way Garrett had systematically trained me to prioritize his needs over my own dignity. Eden listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from sympathy to indignation to something that looked like pride. "Good for you," she said when I finished. "It's about time you stood up to him. You don't think I'm being too harsh?" "Clara, honey, I think you've been too soft for too long. My daughters tried that same nonsense with me after Richard died. Started calling me every day to check in, which really meant making sure I wasn't making any decisions they hadn't approved. Took me 2 years to train them out of it." "How?" Eden smiled, and there was mischief in it. "I started living my life loud enough that they couldn't ignore it. Took a pottery class, joined a hiking group, started dating." "Dating?" "Nothing serious, but it got their attention real quick. Amazing how fast they started treating me like an adult again when they realized I might not need their permission for everything." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I don't know if I'm ready for dating. Dating was just my rebellion. Yours might be different. The point is, you need to show him you have a life he's not the center of. Right now, he thinks you're just sitting in that cottage waiting for his next phone call. Aren't I? Are you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Was I? Had I really become someone whose entire existence revolved around being available for Garrett's convenience? That afternoon, I drove to Northview for the first time in months without Garrett knowing I was coming. Not to see him, I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet, but to reclaim the city as a place I could go without needing permission or purpose beyond my own desires. I parked near Millfield Station and walked through the neighborhoods I'd only ever seen from the passenger seat of Garrett's car when he'd driven me to family dinners or holiday gatherings. The city felt different when I was exploring it for myself, rather than being escorted through it as someone's dependent mother. I found a bookstore I'd never noticed before, tucked between a yoga studio and a wine bar. The kind of independent shop that sold poetry collections and hosted reading groups. I bought 3 books, a mystery, a memoir about travel, and a guide to starting small businesses. The young clerk, who couldn't have been much older than 25, smiled as she rang up my purchases. "Great choices," she said. "Are you thinking about starting a business?" "Maybe," I heard myself say. "I'm thinking about starting a lot of things." Next, I stopped at a real estate office. Not because I was ready to sell the cottage, but because I wanted to know what my options were. The agent, a woman named Paisley Morgan who wore confident heels and spoke in precise, enthusiastic sentences, spent an hour showing me listings for condominiums, townhouses, and even a few houses in neighborhoods I'd never considered. "The market's really strong right now for sellers," she explained, pulling up comparables for my cottage. "A property like yours in Brookhaven could easily fund a fresh start somewhere new, if that's what you're looking for." "What would you do?" I asked her. "If you were starting over at 68? Paisley didn't hesitate. "I'd go somewhere I'd always wanted to live but never had the courage to try. Life's too short to stay somewhere out of habit instead of choice. Somewhere I'd always wanted to live." The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove back to Brookhaven. Harold and I had talked about traveling when he retired, maybe spending winters somewhere warm. "Arizona," he'd said, "or maybe the Carolina coast." We'd never done it, always finding reasons to postpone those dreams for more practical concerns. But what if I did it without him? What if Clara Henderson, age 68, decided to stop postponing her life? That evening, I called Reese Patterson's office and left a message with his secretary. "This is Clara Henderson. I need to schedule an additional appointment for Saturday morning to discuss some changes to my estate planning. Please let me know what time works best." Then I did something I hadn't done in 5 years. I planned an evening for myself. I ordered Chinese takeout from the place in town that Harold had always said was too expensive. I opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion that never came. I put on music, jazz, the kind Harold had never liked, and I danced in my living room like a woman who'd forgotten she was supposed to be invisible. My phone, still in the kitchen drawer, buzzed repeatedly. Text messages from Garrett, probably wondering why I wasn't answering. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't care what he needed. His emergencies could wait until I finished my wine and my dancing. When I finally checked the messages around 10 o'clock, there were 7 of them. "Mom, tried calling, but it went to voicemail. Just wanted to confirm we're still on for Friday. Mom, call me when you get this. Starting to worry. Are you okay? Mom, seriously, call me back. I'm driving to Brookhaven if I don't hear from you in the next hour. Okay, I can see your lights are on from the street. Why aren't you answering your phone? I'm going home. We need to talk before Friday." I looked out my front window and saw the faint outline of tire tracks in my driveway. He'd actually driven an hour to check on me because I hadn't answered my phone for one evening. The level of monitoring and control in that action should have been alarming, but instead it felt clarifying. This was what I was breaking free from, this assumption that my availability was his right. This panic when I asserted the most basic boundary of not being instantly reachable. This inability to imagine that I might have my own life, my own evening, my own reasons for not dropping. Everything to respond to his messages. I texted back a single message. "I'm fine. I was busy. See you Friday at 2 p.m. Then I turned my phone off completely and went to bed. For the first time since Harold's death, I slept through the night without waking up to worry about whether someone needed me. In the morning, I woke up to something I'd almost forgotten existed. Anticipation for my own day, planned according to my own priorities. Friday couldn't come soon enough. Not because I was eager to see Garrett, but because I was ready to meet the new version of myself. The woman who made decisions based on what she wanted rather than what others expected. The woman who understood that love without respect wasn't love at all. The woman who was about to teach her son that some trains only come once, and if you miss them by choosing to prioritize something else, you don't get to demand that they wait for you at the station. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that made everything feel possible. I dressed carefully for the appointment. my best navy suit, the pearl earrings Harold had given me for our 25th anniversary, and shoes that made a confident sound on hardwood floors. If I was going to redistribute family wealth, I was going to look like someone who understood its value. Reese Patterson's office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian house in downtown Northview, the kind of place where serious conversations happened behind heavy wooden doors. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly out of habit and partly because I wanted to observe Garrett's entrance without the distraction of my own arrival. At exactly 1:58 p.m., I watched through the reception area window as Garrett's silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. He sat in the car for a full minute before getting out, running his hands through his hair in the gesture he'd used since childhood when he was nervous. When he finally entered the office, he was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing what I recognized as his most expensive suit. "Mom?" He approached me with the careful smile of someone trying to gauge another person's mood. "You look nice." "Thank you." He sat in the chair beside me, and I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. "Listen, about Wednesday night, I was worried when you didn't answer your phone. I know I probably overreacted by driving to your house." "You did overreact. I've just been under a lot of stress with this partnership opportunity. My phone's been ringing constantly with updates, and when I couldn't reach you..." He trailed off, as if the explanation should be obvious. "Garrett, I'm 68 years old. I lived alone for 5 years before you were born, and I've managed quite well for 5 years since your father died. One evening of not answering my phone is not cause for a wellness check." I know. You're right." He opened his portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "I brought some information about the partnership. Financial projections, client testimonials, the whole business plan. I thought it might help you understand why this opportunity is so important." Before I could respond, Reese's secretary appeared. "Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Patterson is ready for you." Reese Patterson was a man who looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who'd been handling family money for 30 years. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of measured speech that suggested every word had been carefully considered. His office smelled like leather and old books, with diplomas and family photos arranged in precise symmetry on the walls. "Clara, Garrett." He shook our hands and gestured toward the chairs facing his desk. "I understand we're here to discuss the family business investment provision of the Henderson Trust." "That's right," Garrett said, immediately launching into what sounded like a rehearsed presentation. "I've brought all the documentation you'll need to process the $300,000 distribution. The partnership agreement, the business plan, projected returns, everything's here." Reese accepted the portfolio but didn't open it. Instead, he looked at me. "Clara, before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand your options as trustee. The business investment provision gives you complete discretion over these distributions. The money doesn't have to be released unless you determine it's in the family's best interest." "I understand." "Good." Reese opened a different folder on his desk. "Now, I've reviewed the trust documents, and there are a few things we should discuss. First, any business investment over $250,000 requires a formal review period of at least 30 days. This protects both the trust and the beneficiary from impulsive decisions." Garrett sat forward in his chair. 30 days? But the partnership deadline is next Wednesday." "I'm sorry to hear that," Reese said without sounding sorry at all. "But these protections exist for good reason. Family money requires family wisdom, not haste." I watched Garrett's face cycle through emotions: surprise, frustration, calculation. "Couldn't we waive the review period? This is family, not some stranger applying for a loan." "The review period isn't optional," Reese continued. "However, Mrs. Henderson could approve a smaller amount immediately if she chose. Up to $250,000 could be distributed today, with the remainder following the standard review process." For a moment, hope flickered across Garrett's features. $250,000 wasn't the full amount. but it might be enough to secure the partnership with a promise of additional funding to follow. Would that work? He asked me. I could probably negotiate a smaller initial investment with the promise of the remaining $50,000 in 30 days. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was leaning forward, hands clasped, eyes bright with the anticipation of getting most of what he wanted. In his mind, this was already a victory, a minor setback that his charm and negotiation skills could easily overcome. "Garrett," I said slowly, "tell me about Tuesday." "Tuesday? Tuesday?" "This past Tuesday, the day after I called you from the train station. What did you do that day?" He looked confused by the question. "I worked, had client meetings. Why? Did you think about me at all?" "Of course I thought about you. I sent you the money for the rideshare, didn't I? What else?" The question seemed to genuinely puzzle him. "What do you mean? What else?" "Did you call to make sure I got home safely? Did you check to see if I was hurt or upset? Did you consider that leaving your elderly mother stranded might have consequences beyond the cost of alternative transportation?" Reese was watching our exchange with the careful attention of someone who'd witnessed many family dynamics play out in his office. Garrett glanced at him, then back at me. "Mom, we talked about this on Wednesday." I apologized. I explained about the business meeting. "You explained why it was acceptable to abandon me. That's not the same as understanding why it was wrong." Garrett's voice took on a note of frustration. "I don't understand what you want from me. I said I was sorry. I paid you back. I can't change what happened." "You're right. You can't change what happened. But you could have learned from it." "I did learn from it. I learned to have backup transportation plans for you." The answer was so fundamentally wrong that it took my breath away. Even now, even after everything we'd discussed, he thought the problem was logistical rather than emotional. He'd learned to manage me better, not to treat me better. "Garrett," I said, my voice steady despite the disappointment crushing my chest. "You learned to manage the inconvenience I caused you. You didn't learn that you caused an inconvenience to me. That's not... I mean, I know you were inconvenienced, but nothing. You learned nothing. You're sitting here asking for $300,000 of your father's money, and you've learned nothing about respect, consideration, or treating family like they matter." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Reese's grandfather clock. Garrett's face had gone pale, and I could see him trying to recalibrate, to find the right words to salvage the situation. "Mom, please. This partnership, it's everything I've worked for, everything Dad would have wanted for me. Your father would have picked me up from that train station." The words hung in the air like a verdict, because it was true. Harold would have left any meeting, rescheduled any appointment, canceled any deal rather than leave me waiting in the cold. Not because he was a perfect man, but because he understood that some things mattered more than business opportunities. "Can do better," Garrett said quietly. "I will do better. Just give me this chance." And for a moment, I almost believed him. For a moment, I wanted to believe that his desperation was genuine growth, rather than just fear of losing what he wanted. For a moment, I considered that maybe this crisis would be the wake-up call that finally taught him to value the people who loved him. But then I looked at his leather portfolio, stuffed with business projections and profit forecasts. I thought about the careful suit he'd worn to impress the lawyer. I remembered the rehearsed presentation he'd launched into the moment we sat down. He hadn't come here to make amends or demonstrate growth. He'd come here to close a deal. Even his contrition was strategic, deployed only when his initial approach had failed. "Reese," I said, turning away from Garrett's pleading expression, "I'd like to invoke the 30-day review period for the full amount." "Mom, no. Please. During that 30 days, I'll be evaluating whether this investment serves the family's best interests. Not just financially, but in terms of the values your father wanted this money to represent. What does that mean? I stood up, gathering my purse and the dignity I'd almost let slip away. It means you have 30 days to show me that you've learned what Tuesday should have taught you. That family isn't a convenience to be managed, but a responsibility to be honored. And if I can't prove that to your satisfaction, I met his eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw uncertainty there. Real uncertainty about whether his mother would always be there to catch him when he fell. Then you'll learn what it feels like when someone you're counting on decides they have more important things to do. I left them both sitting in that leather-scented office, Garrett staring at his useless business plan, and Reese probably calculating billable hours for family drama. Walking to my car, I felt something that was either triumph or heartbreak. Maybe both. I'd stood my ground, set my boundary, demanded respect. But I'd also just declared war on my only son. And wars, even necessary ones, always have casualties. The phone calls started that evening. 7 missed calls by the time I checked my phone at 9 p.m., each voicemail progressively more desperate. "Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. Mom, I know you're upset, but please don't let this partnership slip away over something we can work through. I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I should have handled Tuesday better. Can we please discuss this?" By Sunday morning, there were 12 more messages. Garrett's voice had taken on a quality I'd never heard before. Raw panic mixed with something that might have been genuine remorse. Or might have been the desperation of someone watching their dreams slip away. I didn't call back. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Every conversation we'd had for the past 5 years had been about solving his problems, managing his needs, accommodating his schedule. I had no template for a relationship where I was the one with the power, where he was the one who needed something I might not give. Monday brought a different approach. Instead of phone calls, he showed up at my door at 7 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee from the expensive place in Northview that I'd mentioned liking once, months ago. "I brought breakfast," he said when I opened the door. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. "Please, Mom, just talk to me." I let him in, not because I was ready to forgive, but because he looked genuinely broken. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed countless permission slips and helped with homework and listened to his teenage problems. And for a moment, I felt the weight of all those years between us. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice careful and measured, "about what you said in Reese's office, about Dad picking you up from the train station. And you're right. He would have. He never would have left you waiting like that, no matter what meeting he was in." Garrett stared into his coffee cup. I keep trying to remember if he ever did anything like what I did, and I can't. He just wouldn't have. This was closer to accountability than I'd heard from him in years, but I'd learned to be cautious of Garrett's moments of apparent insight. They had a way of dissolving the moment he got what he wanted. "Why do you think that is?" I asked. "Because he respected you. Really respected you. Not just the things you did for him." Garrett looked up at me, and there was something in his expression that reminded me of the boy he'd been at 8 years old, trying to explain why he'd broken his father's tool. "I don't think I've been doing that. Respecting you, I mean." "What does respect look like to you, Garrett?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I thought I was being respectful. I say please and thank you. I appreciate what you do." Appreciation isn't respect. Then what is? Respect is considering my needs before you ask me to meet yours. Respect is keeping promises even when something more interesting comes along. Respect is seeing me as a whole person, not just the parts of me that are useful to you. Garrett nodded like he was taking notes for an exam. Okay, I can do that. I want to do that. Can you? Yes. Just give me another chance. Let me show you I can be better. I wanted to believe him. The mother in me was screaming to say yes, to take this small moment of vulnerability and nurture it into something real. But I'd spent 5 years mistaking his needs for love, his gratitude for respect, his promises for change. Garrett, this isn't about another chance. This is about whether you've actually learned anything or whether you're just saying what you think I want to hear. I have learned something. I've learned that I don't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me. I'm your mother. That doesn't change, but you might not approve the money. And there it was, the real fear driving his sudden introspection. Not the prospect of a damaged relationship, but the threat to his financial opportunity. Even his vulnerability was transactional. Garrett, if your only reason for wanting to repair our relationship is to secure that $300,000, then you've learned nothing at all. His face flushed. That's not... of course I want the money. This partnership is everything I've worked for. But I also want us to be okay. In what order? What? If you had to choose, having a respectful relationship with me or getting the money for your partnership, which would you pick? The question hung between us like a bridge he wasn't sure he could cross. I watched him wrestle with it, saw the moment when he realized that his hesitation was itself an answer. I shouldn't have to choose, he said finally. You're my mother. You should want what's best for me. I do want what's best for you. But what's best for you might not be what you want most. He left an hour later, promising to call me that evening. He didn't call. The silence stretched through Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. No missed calls, no desperate voicemails, no surprise visits with expensive coffee. The absence of his attention felt both liberating and devastating. For 5 years, I'd been the solution to his problems. Now that I was the problem, he was solving it by making me disappear. Friday morning brought a different kind of call. Not Garrett, but someone named Asher Collins, who identified himself as a partner at the consulting firm. Mrs. Henderson, I apologize for calling you directly, but your son gave me your number. I understand there might be some delay with the funding for his partnership buy-in. The fact that Garrett had given my number to a stranger, that he was involving his business partners in our family conflict, felt like a violation of something I couldn't quite name. Mr. Collins, I don't discuss family financial matters with people outside the family. Of course. I completely understand. It's just that we have other investors interested in this partnership position. And if Garrett can't secure his funding by next week, we'll need to consider other options. The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Garrett had escalated our private family crisis into professional pressure. He was using strangers to manipulate me, to make me feel responsible for his business failure. Mr. Collins, my son, is a grown man who's responsible for his own professional commitments. If he's made promises he can't keep, that's between you and him. But surely you wouldn't want to see him lose this opportunity over a family misunderstanding. Family misunderstanding. As if abandoning me at a train station was a simple miscommunication rather than a pattern of disrespect that had finally reached its breaking point. Mr. Collins, I'm going to hang up now. If you call this number again, I'll be reporting this harassment to your state professional licensing board. I hung up before he could respond, but my hands were shaking. Garrett had sent a stranger to pressure me. He'd reduced our relationship to a business negotiation and outsourced the emotional labor to a professional manipulator. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck and a young woman holding an enormous floral arrangement. 24 roses, white and pink, arranged in a crystal vase that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The card read, "Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I love you more than any business opportunity. Please, forgive me. Garrett." I stared at the flowers for a long time, They were beautiful, expensive, perfectly arranged. Everything Garrett thought would fix what he'd broken. But flowers couldn't undo 5 years of taking me for granted. Flowers couldn't erase the phone call from his business partner. Flowers couldn't change the fact that he'd chosen to pressure me through strangers rather than do the hard work of actually changing his behavior. I called the florist and asked them to donate the arrangement to the Brookhaven General Hospital. "Tell them it's from someone who believes in second chances," I said, "but not third and fourth and fifth ones." That evening, alone in my cottage with the sound of November wind rattling the windows, I faced the possibility that I might have pushed my only son so far away that he'd never find his way back. That in demanding respect, I might have lost love. That in refusing to be taken for granted, I might have chosen to be taken for nothing at all. The phone didn't ring. The doorbell didn't chime. For the first time in 5 years, no one needed me for anything, and the silence felt like drowning. I sat in Harold's chair, the recliner he'd claimed as his own for 20 years, and wondered if this was what it felt like to win a war that destroyed everything you'd been fighting to save. Outside, Brookhaven settled into its quiet Friday night rhythm. Inside, Clara Henderson wondered if standing up for herself meant standing alone. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that matched the weight in my chest. I'd barely slept, alternating between righteous anger and crushing doubt. Had I been too harsh? Was I destroying my relationship with my only son over pride? The questions circled in my mind like vultures. I was measuring coffee with hands that wouldn't quite stay steady when my doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see a small figure holding what looked like a casserole dish. My first thought was that Garrett had sent another peace offering, but when I opened the door, I found Eden Howard standing on my porch, her purple coat bright against the gray morning. "I brought muffins," she said, lifting the covered dish. "And I brought myself, because you look like someone who needs both." I hadn't realized how much I needed company until Eden was sitting in my kitchen, dividing warm blueberry muffins between 2 plates while I told her about the week that had passed. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding, but never offering advice until I'd finished the whole story. "So now I don't know if I've done the right thing, or if I've just been cruel," I concluded, staring at the muffin I'd barely touched. Maybe I should have just given him the money and worked on the relationship separately. Eden was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee with the deliberate care of someone choosing her words carefully. "Clara, can I tell you about my daughter Michelle?" I nodded, grateful for any distraction from my own circular thinking. Michelle is my youngest. Brilliant girl, got her law degree from Stanford, married a lovely man, has 2 beautiful teenagers. But for years after her father died, she treated me like I was made of glass. Wouldn't let me drive at night, insisted on managing my finances, called me 3 times a day to check in. That sounds caring. It was suffocating. She'd taken it upon herself to manage my entire life because she was afraid something would happen to me. And I let her, because I thought that's what good mothers did. Let their children take care of them when they got older. Eden broke off a piece of muffin, but didn't eat it. It took me 2 years to realize that Michelle wasn't taking care of me. She was taking care of her own anxiety about losing me. And in the process, she was erasing me as a person. What did you do? I stopped taking her calls for a week. Just let them go to voicemail. When she finally showed up at my door in a panic, I sat her down and told her the truth, that her care was killing me slowly, that I'd rather risk making mistakes than live in the safety of other people's control. I leaned forward, recognizing something familiar in Eden's story. How did she react? Badly, at first. She cried, accused me of being ungrateful, said she was only trying to help. But here's the thing, Clara. She heard me. Really heard me. Because underneath all that controlling behavior was genuine love, and when she understood that her love was hurting me, she was willing to change. And Garrett? Eden's expression grew gentle but firm. "Honey, I've been watching you for 5 years. I've seen how that boy treats you. And what you're describing isn't love complicated by grief or anxiety. It's entitlement enabled by your goodness." The words hit me like cold water. "You think I should stick to my decision about the money? I think you should stop asking yourself whether you're being too harsh and start asking whether you're being harsh enough." Before I could respond, Eden reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I want to show you something. Michelle sent this to me yesterday." She showed me a text message. "Mom, saw a woman at the grocery store who reminded me of you. Confident, picking her own produce, not asking anyone's opinion. Made me smile and think how proud I am of the woman you've become. Love you." That message exists because I held firm when it mattered. Because I refused to let her love me in a way that diminished me. Eden put her phone away and looked directly at me. "Clara, your son is 43 years old. He's had his entire adult life to learn how to treat people with respect. The fact that he hasn't learned it yet isn't your failure as a mother. It's his failure as a human being. But what if this ruins our relationship forever?" "What relationship? The one where you're his unpaid assistant and emotional support system? The one where your value is measured by your usefulness? Honey, that's not a relationship. That's employment without benefits." Eden's bluntness was shocking and exactly what I needed to hear. She continued, her voice gaining strength. "A real relationship, the kind your Harold would have recognized, has room for both people's needs. It has respect that goes both ways. It has love that doesn't require you to disappear in order to flourish. So you think I should deny the trust fund distribution? I think you should stop making decisions based on what Garrett wants and start making them based on what Clara needs." "What do you need, honey?" The question stopped me cold. When was the last time someone had asked me what I needed? When was the last time I'd even asked myself? I started, then stopped. The words felt foreign in my mouth. "I need to know that my son respects me. Not just appreciates me, but actually respects me as a person worthy of consideration." "And has he shown you that?" "No. Even his apologies have been about getting what he wants, not about understanding what he did wrong." Eden nodded. "Then you have your answer." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the weight of the decision settling into something that felt like relief rather than burden. Finally, Eden spoke again. "There's something else I want to tell you. About the business. Partner who called you. I looked up, surprised. "How do you know about that?" "Because he called me too." "What?" "Yesterday afternoon, Asher Collins said he was trying to reach you about some family financial matter and had gotten my number from a mutual friend. Wanted to know if I could help him understand the family dynamics that were preventing his business deal from going through. The violation felt like a physical blow." "Garrett gave him your number?" "Seems likely. The man knew we were neighbors, knew we were friends. He was fishing for information he could use to pressure you." Eden's expression had turned grim. "Clara, that's not desperation. That's calculated manipulation. Your son is building a case against you, using strangers to do his emotional, dirty work." My hands clenched into fists without my conscious decision. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that Clara Henderson was the most principled woman I'd ever met, and if she'd decided something wasn't in her family's best interest, then he could take that to the bank." Eden smiled with satisfaction. "Then I told him that if he contacted me again, I'd report him for harassment and elder abuse." "Elder abuse? Using business pressure to coerce an elderly person into financial decisions? That's exactly what it is. And the fact that your son enabled it tells you everything you need to know about his character." The anger that rose in me then was different from the hurt and disappointment I'd been carrying. This was clean, sharp anger that cut through all the guilt and doubt. Garrett hadn't just disrespected me. He'd involved my neighbors, my friends, my community and his attempt to manipulate me. "I need to call Reese Patterson," I said, standing up from the table. "What for?" "To make some changes to my estate planning. If Garrett wants to treat family money like a business transaction, then he's going to learn what happens when businesses fail to meet their obligations." Eden stood too, her eyes bright with something that looked like pride. "Now you're talking. What do you need me to do?" "Just be my friend. That's more than enough." "Honey, I've been waiting 5 years for you to let me do that." As Eden left, promising to check on me later, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. The profound comfort of being truly seen and supported by someone who expected nothing in return. Someone who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I picked up my phone and dialed Reese's emergency number. When he answered, his voice was professionally calm but concerned. "Clara? Is everything all right?" "Reese, I need to schedule an emergency appointment for Monday morning. I want to make some significant changes to my estate plan, and I want to discuss options for protecting the trust assets from future manipulation attempts." "Of course. Can you give me a general idea of what you're considering?" I looked out my kitchen window at the oak tree Harold had planted, now strong enough to weather any storm. "I'm considering what it means to honor his memory by protecting our family's values, even if that means protecting them from our family." There was a pause. "I'll see you Monday at 9 a.m. After I hung up, I sat back down at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in years. I made a list of what I wanted for my life, not what others needed from me, not what would make things easier for everyone else, but what Clara Henderson wanted for the years she had left. The list was longer than I'd expected, and Garrett's name wasn't on it anywhere. Monday morning, I arrived at Reese Patterson's office 20 minutes early, carrying a folder thick with documents I'd spent the weekend preparing. Bank statements, investment records, a detailed timeline of Garrett's financial requests over the past 5 years, and most importantly, a letter I'd written to Harold, a conversation with my deceased husband about what he would have wanted for our family's legacy. Reese greeted me with the kind of professional concern that suggested he'd been thinking about our situation all weekend. "Clara, before we begin, I want you to know that what happened with that business partner calling you was completely inappropriate. I've already filed a complaint with their state licensing board. Thank you, but that's not why I'm here." I opened my folder and pulled out the letter I'd written. "I want to read you something." Reese settled back in his chair, his expression attentive. "Dear Harold," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. "I've been thinking about what you'd say about the mess our son has made of his life, and more importantly, what you'd want me to do with the money we saved together. I know you set up that trust because you believed in taking care of family, but I also know you believed that taking care of family meant teaching them to take care of themselves and others." I paused, looking up at Reese, who was listening with the focused attention he brought to all serious family matters. "You used to say that money without character was just expensive corruption, that giving someone everything they wanted without requiring them to earn it was the cruelest gift of all. I think you'd be heartbroken to see what Garrett has become, but I also think you'd be proud of me for finally refusing to enable it." Reese leaned forward slightly. "Clara, what exactly are you proposing?" I pulled out a document I'd drafted over the weekend. "I want to restructure the business investment provision of the trust. Instead of allowing discretionary distributions for family business ventures, I want to create the Henderson Family Character Foundation." "A foundation?" "A charitable foundation that provides business loans and mentorship to young entrepreneurs who demonstrate both financial acumen and community responsibility. People who've shown they understand that success means lifting others up, not just climbing higher yourself." I handed him the proposal I'd spent 2 days researching and writing. The foundation would be funded with the money Garrett was expecting for his partnership. $300,000 could provide startup loans for 6 different entrepreneurs, with mentorship, programs and community service requirements built into the funding criteria. Reese reviewed the document, his eyebrows rising as he read. This is remarkably well thought out. You've included oversight provisions, repayment structures, success metrics. Clara, this isn't just a punishment for Garrett. This is a genuine, philanthropic vision. It's what Harold would have wanted. He believed in second chances, but he also believed you had to earn them. And he believed that family money should strengthen communities, not just individual bank accounts. What about Garrett? Does he know about this? Not yet, but he will. I pulled out another document. I want to offer him a position on the foundation's board. Unpaid, obviously, but with real responsibility for evaluating applications and mentoring recipients. Reese looked surprised. You're giving him a chance to be involved? I'm giving him a chance to learn what it means to serve others instead of being served by them. If he wants access to family money, he can earn it by helping others, access opportunity. If he wants to be part of this family's legacy, he can help build something bigger than his own ambitions. And if he refuses, then he'll have shown his true character, and the foundation will continue without him. We spent the next 2 hours working through the legal details. By noon, the paperwork was complete, and the Henderson family character foundation was officially established. I felt something profound shift inside me as I signed the final documents. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but the deep contentment of purpose finally aligned with action. There's one more thing, I told Reese as we finished. I want to be transparent about this. I plan to announce the foundation publicly, and I want Garrett to hear about it the same way everyone else does. How are you planning to announce it? Smiled, thinking of the conversation I'd had with Eden the night before. Eden Howard knows someone at the Brookhaven Chronicle. They're always looking for positive community news, and I think this qualifies. That afternoon, I called Maria Bennett, the reporter Eden had connected me with. Maria was a young woman in her 30s who covered community interest stories with the kind of enthusiasm that reminded me why local journalism mattered. Mrs. Henderson, Eden told me a little about what you're planning, but I'd love to hear it in your own words. I invited her to my cottage, where we sat in the same kitchen where I'd made so many decisions over the years, about Garrett's school projects, Harold's treatments, my own diminishing dreams. But this time, I was talking about expanding possibilities rather than managing limitations. After my husband passed 5 years ago, I started thinking about what we'd built together and what we wanted to leave behind, I told Maria, who was taking notes with the focused attention of someone who recognized a real story. Harold always said that family money should create opportunity, not dependency. The Henderson Family Character Foundation is our way of living that belief. Can you tell me more about how it will work? I explained the loan structure, the mentorship component, the community service requirement. As I talked, I could see Maria's excitement growing. This wasn't just a human interest story. This was news that could impact real lives. Mrs. Henderson, this is remarkable. A $300,000 foundation launched by a widow in honor of her husband's values. And you mentioned there's a personal component to this decision. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their worst impulses. This foundation represents the values my husband and I shared, and we believe those values are more important than any individual's immediate wants. Will your family be involved in the foundation? They're welcome to earn their involvement by demonstrating the character traits we're looking for in all our applicants. The interview concluded with Maria asking for photos of me, of Harold, of the trust documents, of the cottage where we'd built our life together. As she prepared to leave, she turned back with one final question. Mrs. Henderson, what do you hope people learn from this story? I thought about Garrett, about the phone, calls that had stopped coming, about the choices that had led us to this moment. I hope they learn that it's never too late to align your actions with your values. That love isn't the same as enablement. and that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is require people to become worthy of your generosity. The article ran on Wednesday morning, front page of the local section with the headline, Brookhaven Widow Establishes Foundation to Honor Husband's Legacy of Character-Based Success. The photo showed me sitting at my kitchen table, Harold's picture visible in the background, the foundation documents spread before me like a blueprint for the future. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing with calls from local business owners wanting to know how to refer young entrepreneurs to the foundation. By noon, 3 different people had stopped by my house to share their own stories of family members who'd needed tough love to find their way. By evening, Eden had forwarded me emails from people across the state who'd seen the story online and wanted to contribute to the foundation or create similar programs in their own communities. For the first time in 5 years, I was receiving attention not because someone needed something from me, but because I'd created something worth noticing. People weren't calling to ask for favors. They were calling to offer support, to share resources, to be part of something meaningful. At 6 p.m., as I was reviewing foundation applications that had already started arriving, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't seen in almost 2 weeks. Garrett. I let it ring 4 times before answering, not out of cruelty, but because I needed those moments to center myself in the woman I'd become, rather than the mother I'd been. Hello? Garrett. Mom. His voice was different, smaller, uncertain in a way I'd never heard before. I saw the article. I thought you might. Is this real? Are you really giving away my inheritance to strangers? I'm using family money to honor family values. If that feels like a loss to you, I think that tells us everything we need to know about your relationship with those values. Silence stretched between us, heavy with 5 years of unspoken truths finally brought into the light. Mom, please, can we talk about this? We are talking about it. I mean, in person. Please. I think I finally understand what you've been trying to tell me. I looked out my kitchen window at the oak tree Harold had planted, now bare for winter but strong in its dormancy, ready for whatever spring might bring. Understanding isn't enough anymore, Garrett. If you want to be part of this family's future, you're going to have to earn it, just like everyone else. Garrett arrived at my cottage the next morning at exactly 8 a.m., carrying a single cup of coffee, his own, and wearing a suit that suggested he'd come straight from a business meeting or was treating this conversation like one. His face looked drawn, older somehow, as if the past 2 weeks had aged him in ways the previous 5 years hadn't. "May I come in?" he asked when I opened the door. No assumptions, no automatic entry. It was a small thing, but it was something. I led him to the living room instead of the kitchen. The kitchen felt too intimate for what needed to happen. This wasn't a family chat over coffee. This was a negotiation between 2 adults with fundamentally different values who happened to share DNA. I read the article 3 times, he began, settling into the chair across from mine. And I've been thinking about everything you said, about respect, about character, about Dad. And I think I owe you more than an apology. I think I owe you the truth. He set his coffee down without drinking it, his hands clasping and unclasping in his lap. The truth is, I've been treating you like my personal assistant for years. I told myself it was because you were so good at handling things, because you never complained, because you seemed to enjoy helping. But that wasn't really why. I waited, sensing there was more. I treated you that way because it was convenient. Because it meant I could live my life without having to consider anyone else's needs or schedules or feelings. I could make plans and know that if something went wrong, Mom would fix it. I could take risks knowing Mom would be my safety net. I could be selfish because Mom would be selfless enough for both of us. The honesty was brutal and exactly what I'd been waiting to hear for 5 years. But honesty without change was just confession, and confession without penance was just words. Why are you telling me this now, Garrett? Because I lost the partnership. I felt a twist of something, not quite satisfaction, not quite sympathy. When? Yesterday. When the 30-day deadline passed and I couldn't produce the funding, they gave the position to someone else. Someone whose family actually supported their success instead of sabotaging it. I didn't sabotage anything. I refused to enable it. I know. His voice was quiet, defeated. I know the difference now. I think I've known it for a while, but I didn't want to admit it because that would mean admitting what I'd become. And what have you become? He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised instead of the man who'd been using me. Someone Dad would be ashamed of. Someone who thinks family exists to serve his ambitions instead of the other way around. Someone who... He stopped, swallowing hard. Someone who left his mother at a train station because strangers were more important than keeping his word. Yes, you did. I know. And I know that sorry isn't enough anymore. I know that promising to do better isn't enough either, because I've made those promises before and broken them every time something more interesting came along. I leaned forward slightly. So what are you proposing? I want to apply to the foundation. The statement hung in the air between us, unexpected and somehow perfect. For funding? For the chance to prove I understand what you and Dad built together, what you're trying to protect. He pulled a folder from his briefcase, not the expensive leather portfolio he'd brought to impress the lawyer, but a simple, manila folder with handwritten tabs. I've been thinking about something other than myself for the first time in years, and I have an idea. I'm listening. Mentorship programs for small business owners who are struggling with work-life balance. Specifically, people who've inherited family businesses and are trying to honor their parents' legacies while adapting to modern markets. His voice gained strength as he talked. I've been consulting for family businesses for years, but I've only been looking at profit margins and growth strategies. I've never paid attention to the human cost of success. What would this program look like? Monthly workshops on sustainable business practices. Not just financially sustainable, but emotionally and relationally sustainable. How to grow a business without sacrificing your marriage, your children, your integrity. How to honor what your family built while making it your own. He opened the folder and pulled out several handwritten pages. I've already identified 12 family businesses in the region that could benefit from this kind of support. I took the pages and read through them. The research was thorough, the business cases compelling, the community need clearly documented. But more than that, the proposals showed evidence of actual thought about other people's well-being, not just their productivity. This would require a significant time commitment, I observed. Probably 20 hours a week minimum, and most of it would be unpaid. I know. And it would mean admitting publicly that you've been doing business consulting wrong for years, that you've been prioritizing profit over people. I know that too. Why are you willing to do it? Garrett was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. That success without character isn't success at all. That family money comes with family responsibilities. That being trusted with resources means being worthy of that trust. And how do I know this isn't just another performance? Another attempt to say what you think I want to hear so you can get what you want? Because I'm not asking you for anything, except the chance to earn your trust back. I'm not asking for money or favors or special treatment. I'm asking for the same opportunity you're giving to strangers, the chance to prove I understand what service looks like. I studied my son's face, looking for the calculation that had underlain every interaction we'd had for the past 5 years. But what I saw instead was exhaustion, genuine remorse, and something that might have been hope. There would be conditions, I said finally. Name them. First, you would apply through the same process as everyone else. No family preference, no special consideration, If your proposal isn't strong enough to compete with other applicants, it gets rejected. Understood. Understood. Second, if you're accepted, you work under my supervision as foundation director. That means I evaluate your performance, set your objectives, and determine whether you're meeting the program's standards. Agreed. Third, this doesn't change anything about our personal relationship. Earning your way back into the family business doesn't automatically repair the damage you've done to our family bond. Those are separate projects that will require separate work. Garrett nodded slowly. What would that work look like? I don't know yet, but it starts with understanding that being my son is a privilege you lost when you started treating me like an employee. If you want that privilege back, you'll have to show me that you value the relationship for what I bring to it, not just what I can do for you. How do I do that? I stood up, walking to the window where I could see Harold's oak tree, now budding, with the first hints of spring. You start by living like someone who deserves to be trusted. You show up when you say you will. You consider other people's needs before making requests. You contribute more than you take. You do those things consistently, without being asked, without expecting praise, until they become who you are instead of who you're pretending to be. And if I do all that? I turned back to face him. Then maybe, eventually, we can build the kind of relationship your father always hoped we'd have. The kind where love and respect aren't separate things, but two parts of the same whole. Garrett stood too, leaving his untouched coffee on the table. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask this anymore, but do you think Dad would have given me this chance? I thought about Harold, about his patience and his principles, about the way he'd insisted on second chances but never third ones. Your father believed in redemption, but he also believed it had to be earned. He would have given you this opportunity, but he would have held you to every standard I'm setting. Then I'll try to earn it. Trying isn't enough anymore, Garrett. Either you do it or you don't. Either you become someone worthy of this family's trust, or you continue being someone who expects trust without earning it. I understand. As I walked him to the door, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole crisis began. Cautious hope. Not hope that everything would be magically fixed, but hope that change was actually possible. That my son might finally be ready to do the hard work of becoming the man his father had raised him to be. The foundation application is due Friday, I told him. Same deadline as everyone else. I'll have it ready. I watched him drive away, noting that he waited until I'd waved goodbye before pulling out of the driveway. Another small thing, but small things added up to big changes when they accumulated over time. Inside, I sat down with the foundation applications that had been arriving all week. 12 young entrepreneurs with dreams, plans, and the kind of hungry determination I recognized. From Harold's early business days, each one would receive the chance Garrett had been taking for granted, and maybe, if he worked hard enough and changed deep enough, Garrett would earn his place among them. But not because he was my son, because he'd proven himself worthy of being Harold's. 6 months later, I stood in the newly renovated community center in downtown Brookhaven, watching as the first cohort of Henderson Foundation recipients presented their quarterly progress reports to a room full of local business leaders, town council members, and proud family members. The space buzzed with the kind of energy that comes from dreams being built rather than just talked about. Mrs. Henderson? A young woman named Iris Kelly approached me, carrying a beautifully crafted wooden sign. I wanted to show you this before. We hang it in my shop. Your foundation loan made it possible. The sign read, Kelly's Custom Furniture, built to last, built with heart. Below it, in smaller letters, proud recipient of the Henderson Family Character Foundation. It's beautiful. Iris, your father would be proud. He would. And Mrs. Henderson, thank you for seeing something in me that I wasn't sure was there. As Iris walked away to rejoin her family, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Eden Howard appeared beside me, wearing her signature purple coat despite the warm spring evening. "Look at what you've built," she said, gesturing around the room. 6 businesses funded, 12 jobs created, and a waiting list of applicants 3 pages long. Harold would be amazed. Harold always believed in what people could become, not just what they were. I'm just finally learning to see it the same way. Across the room, I spotted Garrett setting up chairs for the evening's final presentation. For 6 months, he'd shown up early and stayed late for every foundation event, never asking for special recognition, never mentioning his own application status. His mentorship program had launched in February with 8 participants, and the feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. "How's he doing?" Eden asked, following my gaze. "He's learning, slowly but genuinely." I watched as Garrett helped an elderly man to his seat, then checked to make sure everyone had water and program materials. Last month, he drove 3 hours to Millfield Station to pick up one of his workshop participants whose car broke down. Didn't ask for credit, didn't mention it until I heard about it from someone else. And for the first time in 5 years, I recognized the boy I raised. The evening's keynote speaker was Dr. Autumn Coleman, a business ethics professor from the State University who'd been studying the Foundation's approach to character-based lending. Her presentation focused on how community investment could strengthen both individual businesses and social connections. The Henderson model isn't just about funding ventures, Dr. Coleman explained to the attentive audience. It's about funding character, about recognizing that sustainable success requires sustainable values. As the evening wound down and families began gathering their things, Garrett approached me with an envelope in his hand. "Mom, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" We stepped outside onto the community center's front steps, where the spring air carried the scent of blooming dogwoods and the promise of summer. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward the envelope. "My formal application for foundation funding, for the mentorship program expansion." He handed it to me, but didn't let go immediately. "I wanted to give it to you personally, not just submit it through regular channels." "Why?" "Because 6 months ago, you told me that being your son was a privilege I'd lost. I wanted you to know that I'm not applying as your son. I'm applying as someone who's spent half a year learning what it means to serve others instead of expecting to be served." I took the envelope, noting that it was addressed to Clara Henderson, Foundation Director, rather than Mom. "Garrett, there's something I need to tell you. The Foundation Board met last week to review all pending applications." His face tensed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "Your program was approved, unanimously. Not because you're my son, but because you submitted the strongest proposal we've received. The board was particularly impressed with your measurable outcomes and your participants' testimonials." Relief and something deeper, pride maybe, flickered across his features. "Thank you, not for approving it, but for making me earn it. That's what your father would have done." "I know. And Mom? I know we still have work to do on the personal side of things. I know that earning professional respect doesn't automatically repair what I broke between us. No, it doesn't. But it's a beginning." Garrett smiled. Not the practiced charm he'd used for years, but something genuine and uncertain. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, maybe just that cafe you like in town. I'd like to hear about your life, not just report on mine." The invitation was so simple, so free of agenda or expectation, that it took me a moment to recognize it for what it was. The first time in 5 years that my son had asked for my company rather than my assistance. I'd like that very much. As we walked back toward the parking area, I caught sight of my reflection in the community center's glass doors. The woman looking back at me was someone I almost didn't recognize. Confident, purposeful, surrounded by evidence of impact rather than utility. Clara Henderson, Foundation Director. Clara Henderson, Community Leader. Clara Henderson, Woman. Who'd learned that love without respect was just elaborate servitude, and that the most generous thing you could do for someone was require them to become worthy of your generosity. "Mom?" Garrett had stopped beside his car. I never asked, "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" I thought about the question as I looked around at the thriving downtown, the foundation recipients heading home to businesses built on character as much as capital, the son who'd finally learned to see me as a person rather than a resource. I'm not happy that it took a crisis to teach us both what we should have known all along. But yes, I'm happy with who we're becoming. Driving home to my cottage in Brookhaven, I passed the train station where my journey towards self-respect had begun. The evening light made the bronze statue gleam, that railroad pioneer still gazing toward the horizon with determined optimism. Some trains, I'd learned, only come once. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to miss the wrong train, you discover you're strong enough to build the track for the right one. And sometimes, that track leads not just to where you're going, but to who you were always meant to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.